Hey everyone, this is Captain Orlando Muniz with Nomad Fishing. Today I'm bringing you something different. I'm bringing you a tutorial that has to do with weather and boating safety. This is not typically what I like to do. Normally involves fishing and fishing instruction, that type of thing. But today we're going to talk about boating safety, especially during the summer months. And I get my inspiration for videos from different sources, sometimes from viewers or friends or comments that conversations with people. In this case, there was two incidents last week which kind of got me thinking about this topic. I had one friend, his name is Miguel, you may have seen him in some of the videos. He was out with a buddy of his on Saturday. They were out mahi fishing about, I'm saying 15 to 20 miles out. They're over 2,000 feet of water. And they got caught in some bad weather in a storm. They had caught a few fish. They were trying to dodge the storms a little bit. It got rough, and they got hit by lightning. Actually, one of their rods on the T-top got hit, and I'm going to put up a picture of that rod so you can see what it did to it. And it was a very scary situation. Not only did the lightning damage the rod, but the surge, the power surge of the lightning came through the boat, I guess through the T-top. His buddy was holding on to the T-top at the time. He got zapped in the hand. Luckily, it wasn't anything serious. I think it was a small burn or something like that. And they did lose both engines. Both engines shut down. Apparently, some of the electronic components on the engines suffered some damage, so they lost power. They actually had to end up calling for help. They were way beyond cell phone range, so they contacted the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard was able to relay a message to Sea Tow. Luckily, his friend was a Sea Tow member, and they were able to get towed in to safety. It took a few hours because with the rough seas, they were getting towed in at approximately 3-4 miles per hour, and they were way out. So it took several hours for them to reach, the boat ramp, the port where they were launched out of. But they got back safely, and all was well. It was an expensive lesson to learn, but it could happen to anybody. The second case I heard about was a buddy of mine who runs a couple boats out of Crandon Park Marina in Key Biscayne. They were coming back from a charter. They had been out mahi fishing. It was like 2 days later, and they were already back in the bay when one of his boats got struck by lightning. Same thing. Well, this time it damaged their electronics, and it also had damage to both of the diesel engines. Both engines quit. Luckily, there was another charter boat nearby, and they were able to toss them a rope, toss them, and tow them back to the dock. There were no injuries. Everybody was well. Just injuries to the boat. It's just going to take a little money to fix. But other than that, everything was fine. So today I'm going to talk to you about this type of incident, how to avoid it, and what to do, what not to do. So let's get into that a little bit. Now, first things first, a lot of this starts with the time of year. Right now, we're in the summer months, and this is when these storms are very active. Typically, during the summer, I prefer to run my trips early in the morning. The earlier, the better. And I like to be back by noon, no later than 1 o'clock back at the dock. Why? Because most of these storms start forming in the early afternoon. Sometimes 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they start to form. I also like to check the weather before I go out, because on days with southerly or southwesterly breezes, it seems like those breezes tend to bring in a lot of that moisture, but that moist air that fires up the storms that much faster. So these fire up earlier, and they're more intense, sometimes more widespread. On days when there are southeasterly winds, which are very common this time of year, or easterly winds, the rain seems to stay overland, especially out west. Out on the East Coast, or over the ocean, the coastal areas seem to not get as much rain on those easterly winds or southeasterly winds. The rains tend to stay a little further inland, and usually we don't see a lot of rain. Another thing I like to do, if I'm scheduled for an afternoon or an evening trip, I like to start late. Why? Because a lot of times the storms have already passed by 4 or 5 o'clock. They're fizzled out, and the weather's actually quite nice again. So if I'm going out, let's say mangrove snapper fishing, well, I know they don't bite well until after dark anyway, so I may just start at 6 or 7 o'clock after the storms are fizzled out, and the weather's actually quite nice. So that's another thing. The other thing with storms is, if you do have storms in the area, the best advice I can give you is try to avoid them if at all possible. It's not always possible to avoid them, but try to avoid them. If you see a storm, try to figure out which way the storm is moving and try to move in the opposite direction. It's not always possible, but if you can move. Also, if your boat's got a radar system, a lot of times you can track the storms and see which way they're moving, see how intense they are, see how big they are, and you can take evasive action that way. So there's a bunch of things you can do. Even if you don't have radar, there are apps on your phone which you can check local radar and you can get an idea of how intense the rain is, where the rain is at, where it's expected to move, and you can make some good decisions that way. So there's a lot of things you can do to stay safe, but those are some of the most important. Now let's get on to the next topic. The next thing I want to mention is being prepared. We all know that there are boating regulations and safety requirements on boats. When it comes to boating in the summertime, you want to be prepared. You want to make sure you have all your life jackets, your throwables. You want to have your flares. You should have a working VHF, even though it's not required. I like to have an EPIRB also. The VHF is really crucial because when you have a problem, a lot of times you can't call for help on your phone because you're out of phone range, or your phone might not be working, you may lose charge. But with the VHF, you could always get a hold of someone. If you can't get a hold of CETO or somebody else, or if it's not a life-threatening emergency, you could always call the Coast Guard and they'll be happy to relay your message to CETO or Boat US and have them come out and assist you. If you're in a life and death situation, then you want to, call the Coast Guard, get them involved, and you want to get help out to you as soon as possible. But those are some of the things you need to remember. The safety gear should all be up to par. You should have more than enough and have everything you might need. The other thing is you want to keep in mind is in the summertime, when you leave the dock, many times it's flat calm. It's a slicker. It's flat out there. It looks like a lake. Remember that when you get these storms, the winds could gust anywhere, sometimes 30, 40, 50 mile an hour. So the seas can go from flat calm to very rough, very fast. So you have to be prepared to deal with that. I see boats out there all the time, small boats, because the weather's nice. And I always tell myself it's one thing to go out, it's another thing to come back in. You got to make sure you come in while you still can. Don't wait until the last minute because it might be too late. If you feel like the weather is becoming a little threatening, it's never a bad idea to turn around and go inshore. Even if you don't want to cut your trip short, you might want to just stay inshore the rest of the trip, maybe fish a little bit inshore, and just keep yourself out of danger. It's a lot easier to get help inshore than it is offshore. And remember that when you're offshore in a storm, especially a lightning storm, you're probably the only object floating around out there, and you're probably the most likely to get hit. So you got to be careful. Speaking about getting hit, let's talk a little bit about what you can do to avoid getting hit, and also what you should do in case that a storm is threatening or there are storms in the area. Like I said, it's important to be prepared. If you do see weather approaching and it looks like you're not going to be able to avoid the weather, the storm, whatever it is, couple good things you should keep in mind. If you have time to lower your outriggers and your boat has outriggers, bring them down as low as possible. If you have an antenna, maybe lower the antenna a little bit so it's not up so high. Remember, objects that higher they are up in the air, the more likely they are to get hit. If you have fishing rods up on top, bring them down, lay them down. Try to get your profile as low as possible. If the boat's if you're in a seaworthy boat, a nice large boat, and there's a cabin, maybe you want to go in. At least you could have most people go inside the cabin and stay out of harm's way in there. And if you're like me and I like to stay on the deck, then you might want to stay, towards the center of the boat and down as low as possible. You don't want to get up anywhere up high. You want to stay low. You also want to avoid touching any metal on the boat. If the boat's got an aluminum or stainless pipework, don't touch that because that's probably going to zap you if the boat gets hit. So if you follow all of these things, that should help keep you safe. If you have to steer through a storm and you're not comfortable holding onto the metal steering wheel, one thing you can do is take a towel or something like that, and use that to steer so you're not touching that steering wheel directly. And if you do get a strike, you're more likely not to have any physical damage. So little things you can do like that to keep safe. Now, lastly, I'm going to bring up the last topic, and then we're going to close this out. The last thing I want to mention is storms and their reach. A lot of times, especially in the summer months, you'll be, sitting out and you'll see a storm off to the distance. One good rule is if you can hear thunder, you're probably close enough to get hit by lightning. So you always want to stay far enough away where you can't hear anything. Actually, I like to stay out as far away from lightning as I can. But if you're in a situation where maybe you can't go any further or what have you, try to at least stay far enough that you can't hear any thunder. Usually if you can't hear the thunder, you're far enough away. These lightning strikes, when they come down, they have a way of going out away from the storm, and they can reach several miles. I've heard as much as 8-10 miles away. So you have to be careful. Just because you're not in the storm doesn't mean you can't get hit. Try to avoid it at all costs. And like I said, if you can avoid the storm, that's usually the best case scenario. Now in the summer, those storms do pop up, sometimes unexpectedly. Like I said, watch for the wind direction. When you get those southwesterly breezes, there's a good chance those storms are going to pop up earlier, and they might be a little more intense or more widespread. If you got the easterly breezes, it's usually a little better, a little more stable. You'll probably get the late afternoon storms anyway. Just keep an eye on them and try to stay out of trouble. Sometimes you're better off just waiting offshore for the storms to fizzle out, but that's a call that you're going to have to make on your own. Since I'm speaking about storms, storms are not only limited to the summer months. You will get them in the winter too, usually when there's an approaching cold front. Usually where that hot and cool air meet, there's some severe weather. It usually involves some high winds and rain and sometimes lightning. The only bright spot is that those storms that come through with the front usually are moving very quickly, and most of them aren't very wide to begin with. So they move through very, very fast. There are some cases where some fronts where the storms ahead of the front are pretty large and pretty widespread. So you have to be careful. Best thing to do is to check the forecast, and if you know something like that is coming, just stay out of it. Try to go in, get out before it comes in. Again, you can monitor on your radar, you can watch it on your phone. If you have satellite weather on your boat, whatever it is, keep tabs on it so you're not caught in it. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit that like button. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. Also, if you have ideas for future videos, you can mention them there too. If you haven't already done so, you could become a member of the channel and help support this channel if you like the content. And I'm going to be bringing in more and more exclusive videos for the members. Until next time, my name is Captain Orlando Muñiz with Nomad Fishing. Thanks.